For me, the core idea of perfect arrangement is putting the American dream under a microscope, right? And from the perspective of traditionally marginalized groups. The plot centers around two U.S. state employees working in the federal government and how they're struggling to maintain the facade of their public life and their private life during what's called the Lavender Scare, which came out of Senator McCarthy's Red Scare, where they were hunting down perceived communists. But the Lavender Scare was more focused on what they called deviance, which included anyone outside of their definition of traditional American values. And in this particular instance, they're targeting LGBTQIA plus individuals during that time. The contrasting tones in the play was the most interesting part to me. I think contrast in tone and in story is really fascinating to me because it makes the play ultimately more real and the performances more real, because life, I think drama contains great humor and humor contains great drama, the tension of those two things. And so exploring that in rehearsal in a way that audiences can go seamlessly from moment to moment and follow these characters through what is ultimately a very high stakes situation, but has to be filtered through a sense of humor so they don't ultimately lose their minds having to balance this private and social life that are completely on either ends of the spectrum in terms of like tone and personality. When I was looking at casting the play, I genuinely went in with just a great curiosity because I think queerness has such a broad range of appearances. But in this time period, there's so many lines where they're hunting for these deviants or these queer people, and they have such a narrow lens of what that is, particularly looking at people who are maybe femme presenting or dress a certain way or have a certain cadence to how they speak. But the reality of that, people of all shapes and sizes, colors and creeds can be queer. And so in the casting, it was important to me that the primary couples identified in some way with a queer life and truth to them. But I obviously didn't ask that in rehearsals, but that was important to me in terms of putting the cast together. And I was also interested in actors that would dive into this play with an open mind, because that contrasting comedy and drama can be very tricky to play. And so when putting the people together of ultimately who's game, who's ready to play, and who isn't afraid to dig deep in those emotions that we sometimes shy away from in our personal lives. The dual identity aspect was a big part of the conversations early on and has really sustained throughout the rehearsal processes. And the intriguing part is that I think everyone has a personal, a private, and a social life, right? We all sort of navigate these different dynamics for ourselves. We're always the same person, but depending on the relationships, we might have a different approach or a different version of us that comes forward to engage with each other. And so when conversations with the actors of how that exists in their life and having sort of a self-awareness of what those different traits are and how we can capitalize on that when we're exploring these characters who are doing that ultimately for the safety and sanity of their whole existence. And then within that, to use the high stakes tension of the play to figure out when those masks start to crack or when those different types of personalities or environments start to blend, and how we catch ourselves trying to keep the secret, but also express ourselves in a truthful and complimentary way to the situation at hand. So I've been living with this play in my imagination for a couple years, and the historical parts of it are really interesting because growing up, I didn't hear a lot about it in my history classes. I think with the exception of maybe a reference to Stonewall, and I'm from California, so Harvey Milk was a little bit a part of my education. But when you start to really dive into the gay rights movement and that it's pre-Stonewall, it gets a lot more complicated because of the federal government's position on the people that they're targeting in this particular play. There's a lot of burying of those people and those individuals. So when you start to unpack it, it can be a little tricky because people might not be aware of it. And I hope when people come to see it that they start to realize that a lot of this is based on real lives and real experiences that took place during 1950s, and the tricky political relationships between these different groups of people. An interesting part about the historical elements of this play is, unfortunately, how relevant they are right now. We're seeing a lot of legislation being pushed through. We're seeing a lot of executive orders coming from the federal government that are targeting the same groups that Senator McCarthy was in 1950s America. And so when people seeing this and realizing that we're only 50, 60 years from when this was taking place, and yet we're repeating the same patterns of abuse, same patterns of targeting groups that for some reason are threatening to individuals in power that want to silence and potentially even removing from the public sphere all of these families and all of these people that are just trying to live their lives and trying to be as authentic as they can be. And I'm curious how audiences are going to receive that message, because the duality of then and now. And I hope it sparks interesting conversations and maybe even some action from the public that we're repeating some very dangerous times. The most rewarding part of directing this play is how much it means to me as just a young queer person, and what it means to me to really expose this part of history through, like we've been saying, the humor and the tension and the drama, and sharing a piece of people's lives that I think have gone unnoticed. I really hope audiences can see the humanity in each of them and can see the vulnerability and just the overall humanness of these people that they can hopefully relate to, because that's ultimately what theater should be. It's about community. It's about bringing people together. It's about empathy. And what I'm hoping is that through the empathetic relationship to these couples and these families in the play, that people can start to see themselves in the circumstances that are unfolding. Hopefully not in the darker, more painful elements, or maybe that's helpful, but I really want people to walk away feeling like, one, they've learned something really significant about our history in America, and two, that they have a deeper understanding of a different experience of what it's like to live here in the United States. And then third, maybe they can be a little kinder to people that have a different experience than themselves, because I think that's what we need right now more than anything else.